Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am genuinely very honored to have a really special connection for me, and a man who is a naval pilot, who was a commander of the USS Nimitz, an aircraft carrier, a very famous and awesome aircraft carrier. He is the author of Learn How to Lead to Win. He was 36 years in the American Navy. I almost slipped into the Royal Navy, didn't I, Mike? And a Top Gun pilot, trained in the famous Top Gun base, which we all know so well in the film. And now, for 5.5 years, he's been a vice president at Boeing. And so able to translate all that amazing leadership experience in the US Navy into business. And that's why I want him on the show. And also, we just found when we started to chat, we had so much in common, and the connection with my father was very special. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, John. It's so great to be here with you. And you're right, we have that connection not only in the material world with your father training in the same places as me and being an aviator, but also in the view of leadership and team building.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed those of you listening. Certainly go on to Mike's website. He'll mention it at the end, but definitely I review, as you all know, probably about 50 or 60 books this year. This is a definite book that you've got to listen to. I listen to the books, but Mike has one of those voices, which is a real pleasure to listen to. The stories are amazing, 33 stories, but he's got a load more stories. But they're great stories that they have, really powerful. I find it's the humility, the humanity, and humor, the three hums, I call it, that I like that you show. But definitely have a listen to that, and then sign up for the newsletter because that comes out each week, and I find that a good way to end my week, reading Mike's newsletter. Mike, let's begin with, I'm always interested in the inspiring leaders who come on as guests, who they find as inspiring leaders. And if you were to pick two that you found as inspiring leaders that you'd like to be your guests on the show in future, who would the people be that you'd call out, and why would you choose them?
Well, I have two that occur to me, and they're close to me. The first is Admiral Bill Moran. Admiral Moran, United States Navy, retired, was the 39th Vice Chief of Naval Operations just a couple of years ago, was confirmed to be the Chief of Naval Operations, and ultimately through various things that didn't happen. The man is so inspiring and able to remain kind of above the fray in any situation. I've seen him take extremely thorny issues in front of either a group of 1,000 enlisted people in the Navy, or in front of a hearing in front of the United States Senate or the House, and distill those issues into understandable points, and then able to articulate the way forward he was recommending. He is the consummate meeting host. He will seek all the points of view. He listens a lot better than me, and is able to take into points of view, and then very succinctly says, what I think I heard was this. He's an unbelievable leader. He now spends his time volunteering for various boards and those sorts of things, but I call him my greatest friend and my life coach, because he helps me get over the things that trip me up. He's first. The second is Major General Steve Neary, United States Marine Corps. Steve was an infantryman. He also retired a couple of years ago. He led troops in battle as a colonel in Ramadi and Fallujah, and your listeners and watchers will understand the intensity of the combat that was held there, and he was on the ground there. And he is an extremely, first of all, you can tell he's a Marine. You don't even have to. You can tell no matter what when you get exposed to him. That's a United States Marine right there. He has got a sense of he's got a moral compass that is the strongest I've ever seen in any individual. And he's like the warrior philosopher of the ancient Greek days, that, when Spartans and all that kind of stuff. The man is a Spartan, and he's so motivating at how he approaches things. And so he's also a great friend. When he retired from the United States Marine Corps, he moved in about a half a mile from me, and I got a chance to meet him through a mutual friend, a mutual neighbor, and we've become very, very close. He is also on this sort of journey with respect to leadership examination and helping others lead. And he brings the experience of leading young Marines into combat, high stress, high risk environment, and the ability to build high performing teams that are willing to take that risk. So those two guys, both in the United States forces, stick out to me more than any other, inspiring person that I would look at or watch that I do not know. I don't know Admiral McRaven, but he is very inspiring. I do not know other military members that have become authors. I do know Admiral Jim Stavridis very, very, very well. We served together on a carrier a while back, and we've remained close. And I watch with great interest his intellect as he brings his intellect into all these issues. And too. So, but Admiral Moran and General Neary are the two that really motivate me and cause me to say, hey, those guys, I would follow those guys.
No, that's great. Well, I look forward to them coming on the Inspiring Leadership podcast, because I think there's something quite special when you find someone that an inspiring leader recommends others that they find inspiring. And also this lovely combination between military experience and then being on boards and seeing how you can translate the leadership lessons of operations or combat into business and what applies. And also, I think the very best military leaders learn to let go of stuff, and that they are not who they were then. They adapt quite quickly because you've had to constantly adapt. I mean, you think about, you did a number of desk jobs. You went back to the same, that air warfare side of the Pentagon and places like that, where they wanted you back there. But it was very different from being on the aircraft carrier to then being in a desk job. Flying a desk is very different from flying multiple planes, as you sort of got as you were the Air Wing commander, you got the chance to play with all your toys. Fascinating. I really took so much from your book, and I take so much from a number of people. Some are dry, but some are interesting.
If I can make a comment, John, to that sort of combination, I believe that it is the mark of a good leader to be able to mold themselves into a current situation someplace. And the more a leader can be an effective leader in different environments really speaks to the capability of that human being. There are many people who work really well in like a tactical situation. There are really good bureaucrats, and they're, or when you look at them, you go, hey, that person was effective over here, but it's not effective over there. I think about this all the time. And so, of course, my happy place is on, in a fighter cockpit on an aircraft carrier. But being able to be successful in the Pentagon at increasing seniorities, and I found that when I did have those 4 tours in programming and air warfare, the more senior I got, the more comfortable I was with maneuvering in that bureaucracy. And a lot of people said, no, I don't want to go to the Pentagon. I'll be out here doing this. Thank you very much. I had a 30-year career, flying. I never went to the Pentagon. I'm proud of that. Well, I tend to disagree with that point of view. And, in the UK Armed Forces, there are headquarters that it's the same thing. People don't want to go to headquarters. They don't want to go to the desk job. But in order to be effective as a leader through life, you need to have those different experiences. And it's always a trick with yourself, and you ought to be introspective. How do I function in an environment like that? And you learn how to function in that. Maneuvering through the bureaucracy in the Pentagon and making it work. My last job there was recommending to the Chief of Naval Operations what we should buy. I mean, everything. Not just air warfare, but all naval warfare, and bombs, bullets, people, aircraft carriers, airplanes, ships, submarines, and being able to work through that as a leader and an influencer, and being able to understand that it's a long game and that you're only one cog in this particular wheel. We're out on the carrier. When I was a Striker commander, I was the cog. I made everything else turn. and everything went the way, I said. And some leaders, once they get senior enough, they want to be that big cog, and they're not happy unless they're that big cog. And so I always think, and I think about this all the time, is how do I fit? And maybe it's that humility. How do you demonstrate humility? You talked about the hums. You go, hey, I'm going to be humble today. Well, that's not going to work. How do you embody that? And, later on, I hope we get into like how to be a person of influence or a leader, because it's not with your title. It's how do you think about this as a person when you're trying to influence other people to go in a certain direction, and where are you effective? Okay, I fly a pretty good fighter off of a carrier. I drive a pretty good aircraft carrier. I'm a pretty good strike group commander. I've been trained to do that by the US Navy. That fits. Now I go to the Pentagon. Oh, I don't want to be here. I'm not, I'm just biding my time. Well, that's not effective. You gotta learn. I think the best leaders fit in any situation, and they look around, and it happens in my civilian life now. I look around and I go, okay, I think I need to act like this, and then be open to critique and debrief that, hey, you're not acting like that. You're not effective. You could be more effective this way. But I think our most effective leaders are able to transition from sort of a bit, let's just be very simple, from being a rear admiral in the US Navy to being an executive in business, to being the chairman of a nonprofit board, to being a member of a nonprofit board, to being able to convince the community group that this is a great investment for the community association, for our neighborhood, and I find that, when I talked about Admiral Bill Moran, he does that anywhere. And it's really cool. So I just thought I'd segue.
No, I like it very much, that flexibility and ability to adapt to whatever is thrown your way. I mean, you think about it, there you were doing with your people going through the ceremony as you were crossing the line, and a storm hit, and you had to adapt and do something very different. And a lot of people go, well, I've got this plan, I've got to stick with it, but the situation's changed. Yeah, but I'm going to carry on regardless. No. You have to adapt. So there is that. And then if we take it onto health with metabolic flexibility, the most healthy people have a very flexible metabolism, which can adapt the mitochondria and all the gut microbiome. And what the research is now showing is that we're not all the same. Your gut microbiome and mine are massively different. So a diet that works for you wouldn't work for me. So one size fitting all isn't the way to fit people in. So there's almost like a combination of the two, that on the one hand, we need to be flexible, that we can adapt ourselves to a whole lot of different roles. And at the second time is like finding out, what are you really good at? In your case, you were a super pilot. You went to Top Gun. And you got to drive the big boat with the USS Nimitz. Those of you who are listening, there's a lovely end of it, looks like an end of a wine oak barrel or a whiskey barrel with the USS Nimitz on it. Tell us the story about that, Mike, in your room with all the books.
Yeah. It was actually it was built somebody who's good at woodworking. It's a serving tray. If I took it off that, it went like a serving tray.
Lovely.
Somebody who was good at woodworking gave that to Kelly and me as a gift. Yeah.
Oh, it's very nice, very special. Now,
but I want to. You said something else very, very provocative. One size fits all. As a leader, looking at your team, one size is not going to fit all.
No.
And when you go to employ your brand of leadership on the team, you have to be willing to be inclusive for everybody. You have to understand where that input comes from. And so as a leader, I love how you said that. It's you got to recognize what kind of talent you have on the team and being able to maximize that talent. And you're messing with the formula all the time. And we all have found ourselves with just exactly the right formula, and it's great. And in a couple of my tours, we got settled in with the direct reports, and oh my gosh, it was epically happy, and everybody worked the same, and they finish each other's sentences. And then as you move through that, a couple people change out, and you have to rebuild it again. And that's always, a challenge for leaders. And so that's one size fits all thing is very provocative when not only as a leader, job to job, but also the way you approach your teams.
Yeah. And it's led me on to another thought, which is as I work with CEOs and teams, they're trying to get to know their team well, particularly if they've come in, they've been parachuted in, maybe the previous CEO wasn't very successful, they're replacing them, but it wasn't a team they inherited. It was a team they inherited, wasn't a team they chose. And very much like the same you land on an aircraft carrier, here you are, this is your team, meet the team. Whereas some people love the idea of they clear out the team and they bring in their team. This is my team, I can work with these people can adapt to my style, I'll bring them all with me. But that shows a lack of flexibility because they all have to be little mini-me's or make allowance for your shortcomings because, sorry, I know what he said, but Mike's normally like that. He's a bit rude, but don't worry. What he meant was he really loves you and keep doing a great job. People sweeping up after I had a general I worked for and, he just savaged people and sort of fed bits of their limbs underneath the door after he'd just eaten them out. And that, people had to sort of pick up the pieces afterwards. Not particularly nice to be that way. So what I have found interesting working with these leaders, 2 or 3 psychometrics, which allow all the team to understand their strengths, what they love doing, what motivates and drives, how they think, their decision-making, and the kind of roles in design, develop, operate, and enhance a business that they're most suited to. And it doesn't mean they have to do those roles. It's just that they'll be really fulfilled and happy doing it. Doesn't mean they behave that way. It's just they like doing it. And that is often quite a revelation to people. They go, yeah, this is me. And the boss goes, I never knew you like that. I thought you liked this. I put you in this role, but actually you're really suited. Would you like to do this role? And you go, I'd love to do that role. It'd be just a dream job. And so they often think, we hired them in for that role. They fit that box, squeeze them in. They're that kind of shape. But actually, have we ever checked how to grow and develop them? And I found it very sad in some of the big banks, famous world banks, where people had to leave the bank on promotion into a rival bank to get up the next level because they always saw them in that box at that shape and they weren't ever going to grow. So they left, joined the rival, got promoted, and then came back on a promotion up. And it can't be right. So I don't know what thoughts you have.
That concept right there is very familiar to me in my current situation. And I yell at that all the time. And then, and just recently somebody said, look, we brought this guy back. I said, why'd you let him go in the first place? He was, very, very quality person. But I want to talk about something that you're bringing to just this point. So I did parachute in to be the CEO in Nimitz. And I have also, for a little while in my, I jumped jobs in my current company and parachuted in. And my approach was the same. And I would recommend this for any leader. And I learned it, by the way, on the way to going to Nimitz. And I was CEO of Sacramento, same thing, Sacramento supply ship. That was my deep draft. I could practice with that one before I got the carrier. Again, parachuting in. There's something in my personality that causes me to question, whether I should be there. And I won't go in deeper on that. It's just, sort of an imposter syndrome thing. But what it helps me to do is go, hey, I'm the new guy here, even though I'm the boss. It prevents me from coming in and going, okay, this is the way it's going to be. We're doing this. You guys need to change. You people that are subordinate to me by rank. I always approach it as, I'm the new guy. Let me learn you. I'll fit with your rhythms, because in any organization, the leadership changes. So when I first took command of VF-31, my fighter squadron, which was my first real command, the way that I looked at it actually, and I used to say this all the time, this big cement wheel is turning over, and that's the squadron or the ship or the strike group or the company. And so you just imagine this big cement wheel turning over. And at any time on the top of that wheel, the commander is running, keeping up with the wheel. And then pretty soon they go up and another commander comes along. You're just one of. So the humility comes as a leader when you realize you're just one of. To build a high-performing team, you're not all of that. You're just one of the team. You happen to have the title, but you've got to lead the team as a human. And realizing that you're just there for a little while as a caretaker, and you're fitting with this team that is an evolving organism the whole time, I think keeps that humility going. A lesson for your listeners. go back and look at how Admiral Nimitz, in just after Pearl Harbor, when he is sent out to take command of the Pacific Fleet staff, what he does with the staff. He comes aboard and says, "You guys are great," and not this way, but "You guys are great. I trust you. Let's go to work." He doesn't fire everybody. And of course, they are so downtrodden because with Admiral Husband Kimmel's leadership, they get attacked. And so they're feeling like they had completely failed. And what Nimitz realizes, in order to establish, where he wanted to go, he needed to motivate those people to work, because they knew stuff he didn't know. Now, he ultimately brought in people and kind of said, "Okay, I'll bring in here." He might have had one trusted advisor come with him, but he didn't wipe the slate clean, because if you think about that for a second, if you wipe the slate clean in any organization you come into, you've just wiped out all the organizational knowledge that you had, all the corporate knowledge that you had. You don't want to do that, because you have no idea of that organization if you just parachute in. So you've got to learn kind of what's going on, and you trust the people to do that. The other thing I found in a recent job change I had in my current company, I got parachuted in. And we were hurting a little bit. And so I immediately got on a little bit of a public affairs kick, and I got on videos, and I got on video like this, a WebEx kind of a thing. And I just started extolling the virtues of the team that were pretty downtrodden. And I would call out people and what they were doing to win. And I would motivate them. This is the best team we've got. We're going to go win these things. We're going to, and the morale came up instantly. When I joined Nimitz, I was all fired up and I was an approachable captain. The morale came up. You can generate excitement in the organization as you parachute in. I don't like leaders that come in and chew everybody apart and go, "I'm all about that," and then throw the limbs under the door. You need to be a motivating person. That's the way you get the best out of your team.
And that's what many things I enjoyed in your book was that you were the sort of captain motivator, and when you came over the ship Tannoy, and on the one day when you were a little bit down, and it came across in your voice, and someone stopped you down below decks and said, "Are you okay?" And you're like, "Yep. My God," you realize the shadow of the leader that you cast is a long one. And it is, without being too rah-rah, Tony Robbins sort of, "Let's walk on fire, you're all fabulous." It's depending on who you're with. I mean, Brits are notoriously more sarcastic and underscore, and there's of course the Americans tend to be more positive and sort of upbeat, and then you've got the walking on fire. But there is this legendary story which was true at the Battle of the Imjin River in the Korean War, where British understatement was a problem, and the American general was in charge, and the British brigadier had his sector, where about 1 million Chinese came across the border in the space overnight, carrying little poles and with machine guns and mortars and all sorts of stuff. No vehicles, just all running across in little flip-flops, and into a space held by about 1,000 British troops, including the Gloucestershire Regiment, who had to fight at the front and the back, which is why they used to have a cat badge on the front and the back of their berry. Anyway, he was rung by he rang the general, the American general in charge of the division that he was part of, and he said, "So yeah, things are a bit sticky here." And the general, "Okay, right, okay." And he just thought, it's a bit busy. What he didn't mean to say was, it's like, "I'm getting overrun. I need reinforcements there." So the guy didn't realize that he needed reinforcements, so they were getting seriously overrun. So yeah, we can completely do it the wrong way.
And the other thing, that's a wonderful story. And I love British understatement. I think it's great. And sometimes we are, as Americans, pretty bombastic. But, when we talk about morale and a high-performing team, when you get down with your team, you're not just all sunshine and rainbows. I mean, you can tell, when you're truthful with them, you can tell the truth. And they will buy it. They go, "Hey, this is going to be hard charging when we go through here. It's going to be hard slogging, and this is why we're doing it." And they're all in. So when you build that sort of a rapport with the people you lead, whether it's your direct reports or it's 5,000 people on a warship, they will go with you no matter what the idea is. They'll also see through you if you're always just, happy and giddy all the time and go, "Oh, it's all great," and they're like, "Well, here we go." So there's a balance there. But if you get down with your team, bad news, good news, neutral news, and now you know each other. So when somebody who's an understater says, it's a little sticky, you go, okay, tell me, because I think something's going on here. And somebody who's an overstater, you can kind of take it with a grain of salt, when stuff comes in and, oh my God, the sky's falling. And okay, tell me how the sky's falling. And let me moderate that, both ways.
Yeah, so right. And I think back to your earlier comment, when anybody listening goes in as a leader to take command of any job they get, it really is important to create that psychological safety. And I remember a couple of very senior generals that I worked for, and one particularly, both of them actually, loved fear. They loved creating fear. I remember I was an ADC to one general, and he would just tear people apart, just rip them apart. And he'd always, within a month of taking over the job, he'd fired 2 senior officers, and just, he'd find a reason to fire them. As Napoleon would say, pour encourager les autres, to encourage everybody else to work hard. But it didn't, I don't think that's a healthy way of doing things. And you clearly don't. We've talked about this before. Then there's the other hilarious one where one barking mad, very brutal, aggressive general, his ADC would sit in the front. And we had a collection of ADCs. We call it the AIDS Convention, which was quite relevant for us, that our job was to try and communicate with each other, so there wasn't any great dramas behind the scenes, so nothing went wrong, and also to make apologies when one had torn out another general on a visit. But it was interesting that his ADC was made to sit in the front with the driver, and what are you looking at me for? Don't look at me, turn around, look at the front. And so he did, and he'd been in the job about 6 months, and they were near a barracks about to inspect it, and this general said, I need a piss. Pull over into the bushes here, and I'm going to step out and have a piss. So anyway, he did, very brutal and blunt and rude to the user point. Anyway, door closed, and he said to the driver, okay, drive on. And they drove on, and they got to the gates of the barracks. They said, General, we're here. And there was no reply. And he thought, I won't look back, but General, we're here. He's asleep. Driver, can you see? Goes, I can't see him. He might have fallen to one side. I'm going to have a look. I'll have a look. No, I'll have a look. My God, where's the general? Oh no, what had happened? It's a windy day and the door had blown closed and he was in the bushes taking his pee, and they'd driven onto the barracks. And they left him behind in his full dress uniform with his medals and the whole lot in the bushes on his own. And the ADC said to the driver, drive me to the railway station. I'm going to fire myself. He never saw the general again. He just didn't report for duty. He fired himself because he had a habit of firing everybody. And I luckily survived, but I survived in an environment of fear because my 2 predecessors had both been fired.
Well, I'll give you a digestible or a soundbite for your listeners. Anyone who creates a culture of fear in an organization is going to fail. They're going to fail because they didn't create a psychologically safe environment for people to bring up bad news. They're going to fail because people will try to hide instead of tell you the information you need to know. Even that when the boss creates a culture of fear, even if it's just sort of, you don't even know how they're going to take the news, anything that causes the direct reports to talk amongst themselves about not bringing something up, that is vastly dangerous to the performance of the team, the performance of the organization. You've got to understand that your abilities as a leader to create an environment where people will tell you the worst possible news and not fear that you're going to rip their head off or fire them in the spot. You've got to create that environment. The people that and you had that wonderful French phrase, which I can't repeat, but I can't say it, but that you'll motivate somebody else by firing somebody. No, because you're going to create fear, and you're going to create. I always saw when you didn't create that safe environment, and when you were leading with your title, and by the title I mean you didn't connect as a human being. People won't try. They won't try to fail. They won't risk. They won't do anything for you. So even though they might be working just fine, and as a leader you go, well, everything's fine here. you're not getting the best out of your high performing team because the potential is not being realized. If you lead with fear, you're not going to realize the potential. And that is 100% applicable anywhere.
Yeah, you are so right. And there were two business stories which are true. One of my clients I coached was a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he was involved in looking after Lehman Brothers after it had collapsed. And they kept it going for 10 years. Actually, it made a huge amount of money after it had gone into its zombie status because all the funds kept going. And actually, they paid off most of their debtors. But that's a whole story in itself. However, what was interesting was the culture still carried on of how it was in the days before they crashed. And the culture was good news culture, failure is not an option, which was fine when everything was going well.
Yeah.
But when things started to go badly, people had to have good news. So they actually began to change graphs and charts and reports and only tell the good news because that's all the boss wanted to hear. And that was partly behind many of its faults, partly behind why it went to the wall, because it was good news, which works well when it's going well, but when it's not, no one wants to know. And the other story is when I went into IBM, I was told the legend of John Watson, who was one of the early IBM CEOs. And he took over from another leader who had the same kind of culture as Lehman Brothers. Failure's not an option. Dick Fooled with that sort of guerrilla, make it happen, just get in there, make the money. And one of his senior vice presidents came to him and he said, I know you've only been in the office 2 days, John, but I've got a problem. Can I talk to you about it? And he said, yeah. I said, tell me about the problem. He explained the problem and he said, right, that's quite a big problem. He said, how much does it cost us? And he said, $260,000. He said, I suppose you're going to fire me. Because, of course, good news was the culture there and he'd given him bad news. And John went, fire you? Why would I fire you? I've just invested $260,000 in your development. I want you to go away with your team, work out your learning and your action and what you're going to do. Come and brief me tomorrow about it. He did. He took his advice. He went through it. He coached him, the coach approach. He went away and did it. They actually made $1.5 million by rectifying the problem. And he became the CEO in due course. Now, if he'd made the same mistake again and again, and he was constantly bringing problems, fool on John for trusting him. But this guy, a bit like you were saying, he believed in him and gave him a chance, and the guy and his team just rose to it. I don't know whether that resonates with your experience.
Oh, vastly. And, not pie in the sky here. That kind of approach by a leader is going to amplify the potential of the $260,000 a pound person until it doesn't, and then you know what to do, right? And so the leader gives guidance to that person. Hey, I'm investing in you. Thank you very much. I think learn here. Okay, thanks. I get to stay. But if it does happen again and you're doing your best leadership, well, then it's time for that person to leave. But you've done your due diligence at that point to get the most out of the people that work for you. If you go 260, oh my gosh, you're gone. See ya. And you're trying something else, you're starting from scratch again. And you haven't regained your 260,000, so yeah. It's a great story that the man who lost 260,000 made, 5 times that, and was able to, participate. And then there's also other stories that, the other person continued to lose money until the leader decided, what, I do have to make a change here, but at least you tried as a leader. And when you do make that change, I think the other thing that we sometimes, are afraid of is that direct, plain spoken, trusting conversation between the two that says, hey, and the man, or the person says, yeah, boss, I know. Yep. You gave me all the chances. I tried this, I tried that. It didn't work out. I'm good. Thanks for your support. So you've created that environment where you can have both kinds of conversations and you can marvel at the results. And then when you have something happen like that, and this is the other thing too, is you're building your team and you find somebody that, it's always only good news. You find a way to celebrate, to talk about, to say, hey, this action right here, not only did John, amplify their earnings here, we learned good lessons. And so I do want to hear about the red. It's not green, green, green all the time. I want to hear about the red, the behavior you're trying to emphasize and to to reward is that behavior that says, hey, boss, I got some bad news here. And then what you value is, okay, and what are you going to do about it? So I do this little thing in the teams that I lead called what, so what, now what? What's the problem? So why is it important? And now what are you going to do? So the so what means that they have to be able to tell you. Now, you might know already, it's not just 260,000 pounds, but it's maybe the bedrock of something that is the core of your business. Okay, that's important. And then most importantly for the development of your leaders is, now what are you going to do? The ineffective subordinate comes to you and they go, I don't know what to do, boss, you tell me. So you're trying to cultivate that culture with your direct reports, and then all the way down through your leadership tree where somebody comes in and goes, hey, boss, I got to tell you something, usually bad or middling news. This is what happened. This is why it's important. And now here's what I'm going to do. Do you need any help? No, I'll come back and report to you tomorrow. I found that to be most effective in one, the delegation and the empowerment of the subordinate that motivates them to do that. And then two, your ability, to have subordinates who will think on their own and come to you with solutions you might not have thought of. Because the one thing that we haven't talked about here and through this entire thing is you're not the one with all of the answers. Never. And so you want the collective intelligence of your team. And if you trust them and you motivate them with a safe environment, they're going to come to you with their best ideas. Now, we might fail, but we fail together and we learn and we talk about the learning and we still continue as a team.
Yeah, and it's lovely. I'm going next week, as you and I know, to France to cycle 500 kilometers, raising money for Help for Heroes and my wife's charity, the Inspiring Leadership Foundation for Violence Against Women and Girls. And I'm going with an ex-tornado pilot from the first Gulf War. And he was very interesting, and I wonder whether this resonates at all, that he said, in my early days as a pilot, I just had myself to look after. And I thought I was God's gift and that everybody was there to serve me and get my aeroplane ready to get me in the sky and fly. He said it was only later on that you start to get that leadership experience. Whereas as perhaps with your Steve Neary and with myself as an infantry platoon commander of the Scots Guards, it was suddenly from the very beginning, I had 30 people and a sergeant and corporals and like that. And I had to learn the hard thing. How do I motivate these guys and how do I deal with them? And how do I get all moving together? But you were very good in your book, really, in the lead to win, learning how to lead to win, particularly on an aircraft carrier or the supply ships or other things you did or squadron command. This idea of picking up the rest and taking them with you, and I liked that. That came across really well, and not many, I think, easily make that transition from it's all about me. Look at me, I'm enormous. To it's all about how the team supports getting that one object, that aircraft into the enemy position. But just telling us a bit about the aircraft. What was the fun ones of all, your time at Top Gun things, what were the fun aircraft you enjoyed the most flying? Because that always puts a smile on your face.
Oh, yeah. You started to say aircraft, and of course, Mike, involuntarily, I start to grin.
Yeah.
Before I tell you about flying Tomcats, which is the ultimate best ever, let me tell you about the epiphany I had to the point you just made. And that epiphany occurred in 1996. And I was the executive officer of my fighter squadron. And to your exact point, to the tornado pilot's point, I'm pretty big-headed fighter pilot, and pretty confident in what I'm doing and flying that fighter. But I would take another person with me in the back of the Tomcat, and we collectively would go around in an airplane. And then as I became more senior, when I became the skipper of the squadron, I would qualify people, send them over the horizon, and they'd go do their thing. The epiphany I had was my very good friend at the time, Captain Bill French, who retired as a vice admiral, was taking command of the USS Oklahoma City, which was an American submarine. And because he and I had met each other at a leadership course, he invited me to his change of command. Sitting in the audience of the change of command, I had this blast of, you know what? When I go over the horizon in my airplane, if me and the Rio, and that's it. When he submerges that ship, him and 300 crew members go with him. he's taking 300 other people with him into risk. Of course, the stories in World War II of the destroyers that sacrificed everything against the Japanese in the Pacific. And, the captain that made a decision, we're going to go against this Japanese battleship, and they got obliterated and the entire crew died. And this decision that everybody's in this together, that experience at the submarine change of command is what changed my view of we're taking everybody, and it's that important to do so. But the fun part, yeah, flying Tomcats off an aircraft carrier is the best ever. Flying fighters, I get to fly Super Hornets later on, both single seat, which was interesting, and then 2-seat airplanes as well. So I got a chance to fly what we would call, or what I've compared to, the Tomcat is like a 1967, Chevy Corvette. Goes straight really well. It doesn't turn very well. It's loud. It's sexy. It's really cool looking. Everybody turns their head. And then the Super Hornet's like a brand spanking new 911 Porsche. Digital, fly-by-wire, does things that there's no way that Tomcat's going to do. You can do things with the controls that you'd never do in a hydraulic airplane like a Tomcat. But, just operating around a carrier in a high performance airplane was always just so motivating, and I just loved it. That fit my personality, and so I just I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I could see you just light up like a Christmas tree. And in that legendary film, both films around Top Gun, there were great moments and sad moments. We're going to talk about the great moments. If you were to pick out one of the moments in that film that sort of captured for you the best bits of your job, what would it have been from the film, or the films, either film?
Yeah, so the first film was filmed around us in the Top Gun course. I was in Top Gun in early '85 when they were filming at Miramar. They didn't film the class; they stayed away from us, but they filmed on the base. And so, just having it recognized, that that's what we do. The rest of it all Hollywood, and there's no trophy for best pilot, even though, as we all know, when you walk into the bar, everybody knows, right? So there wasn't that, but it was really cool to see the Hollywood production of what we have fun doing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty neat. The second movie with the Super Hornets, I would quite plainly, at the very end when the Tomcat comes in, I was hooting and hollering out loud in the theater. And I will tell you that the premiere, when we saw the second Top Gun movie, it was a special event in an IMAX theater in the Naval Aviation Museum at Pensacola with all of the active and retired US Naval Aviation flag officers. And so we were teasing each other mercilessly, as you might imagine, Ready Room Atmosphere, about this movie. And there's a huge rivalry between Super Hornet guys and Tomcat guys. And so we were yelling and stuff. So when that Tomcat came out at the end, that was my favorite. It is.
Well, it's lovely that you mentioned Pensacola. And those who can watch the video of this, they can see my dad's naval cap and his naval sword, and a picture of him getting into a US aircraft. I don't know whether we worked out which one it was, Mike, but
I think we have.
He was climbing on board a US aircraft with a sort of parachute underneath him to sit on it in those days. But he trained in Pensacola, and also Corpus Christi, where he met my mom, and so it's been a lovely connection with you. But one of the things we were talking about beforehand was my mother remembering at the base, I think it was Lossiemouth in Scotland, where they were training, that they saw a plume of smoke rising up from the airfield where someone had a crash, and they knew that somebody had been killed, and they sort of waited then for the naval officer to come in full dress uniform. Was he going to be knock on her door, or was it going to be on neighbor? And it was a neighbor's door on that occasion. Another time it was obviously on the door of our caravan where we were living when my father was killed. But that knowing that all the time you were living a very dangerous life. You and I talked about balance and looking after your family, because naval service, you were 8 years at sea when you added it all up, that separation. Few have that in their jobs. And many marriages don't survive, and kids don't know their parents and that kind of stuff, or parents are killed, as happened in my case. Any thoughts that you have about that whole experience, and what kind of leader you had to be to manage in that environment?
Well, I detail a lot of this in the book, John, from several different aspects. One thing that's not, I don't think I wrote this in the book, but this recognition that I might not come home, my first deployment, an administrative detail, I gave Kelly the checkbook and, basically running the life while I was gone. Some people didn't do that. They paid the bills from out on the ship, and they the salary, they gave their wife an allowance of money. They kept all the stuff here. And so I thought that if I didn't come home for some reason, Kelly's ability to transition into taking care of the family would be more difficult. And then through our career, as I came home from deployment, I didn't come home and go, okay, I'm back, let me have it. It was just fit back in. And I think that's a successful part, is you just kind of fit back in. And this realization that, it's a risky environment, I have a different view of it than Kelly does, because I am familiar with the environment. And I used to tease her a lot. I said she would worry that I'm going to, crash at sea. And I said, no, I'm going to walk down the street, a brick's going to fall off a building, hit me in the head. That's how I'm going to die. It's going to be something stupid. It's not going to be doing this. But the uncertainty and the unknown of those who stand at home is the piece that you gotta think about quite a bit. And is there going to be a knock on the door? Recognizing that kind of hanging out there all the time, that risk, you got to acknowledge that perception that there is something going to happen. Now, in the operational world, in my career, my first set of deployments, we would lose an airplane or, air crew or both, on almost every deployment. And, the cost of doing business, and it was accepted. It was like, just things happen out there. And then it wasn't until about the mid 90s when we weren't amazed that we brought everybody home. And it, as I became more senior, it dawned on me, we want to work hard to bring everybody home. It's not the cost of doing business that we should allow this thing to happen. And, back in the day when you're talking about your father was flying and your mom was seeing the plumes of smoke. I mean, the number of mishaps in all of aviation was astronomical. I mean, they used to allow people, you could just walk onto the flight line and go fly any airplane you wanted to. You were a qualified aviator. I think I'll fly that helicopter today. Didn't get it right, crash. Or I'm going to go fly that jet, never flown that jet before. I'm going to go fly that big Bearcat, and they torque roll and die because they don't understand the effects of carbon on the power, things like that. And until we started to put processes in place to say, you know what, we're not going to operate that way. You had those plumes, of smoke and wonder who's going to knock on the door. I think in the early days of aviation, I think we were exploring and experimenting and advancing so fast. And I think that, in the lives of those that were lost in those things, we did, it's amazing how far we've come since the Wright brothers. Yeah. And it's actually staggering how fast, we have built aviation, but we don't have those days anymore where the plume of smoke goes up, or there's the chances of perishing at sea are such a high thing that the family has to actually get into a graveyard mindset and just assume it's going to happen. But I think bringing that system into home here is being able to describe the environment we're in and allay that fear.
Yeah. And it is interesting, the quality of the people who became pilots and knew that it was a very fast and furious life, and their lives were constantly at risk. My father did make plans. He said, look, there may be one day when I don't come home. It just was quicker than they thought. He lived his whole life. It's just his whole life was 33 years, and that was all. And of course, when I was a young man and I was told my father had died, I didn't learn about it until I was old enough. I was only 2.5. I always thought he was quite old when he died. But now I'm 61. I look back, what a young man. I mean, like my stepson is about his age, and my daughters are marrying men who are the age of my father. They haven't even got children yet. And we had 3 children by then. There was a book that's on my mantelpiece, The Right Stuff, which is an amazing book that my brother Graham passed on to me about naval pilots, American naval pilots, training to go into outer space and just pushing it, and then to become astronauts. But that was really interesting about the quality and the character of the people who were going to make good leaders in whatever it was. And I do think that idea of people who have the right stuff to cope with whatever life throws at them, does that resonate for you?
Yeah, it does. In fact, when you talk, I'm going to tell you coincidentally, when you talk about a plume of smoke behind a house, I envisioned the description in The Right Stuff, and then the movie The Right Stuff, when they actually showed the, you know, the boom, and then there's a pall of black smoke, and then they show people in their dress uniforms at a funeral, right? So that is that. I think Tom Wolfe described that environment so well. But I do sense the same thing, that you have and in the experience I had, that theoretically you could say I was risking my life, or my life was in danger at the time. It was very matter of fact, and my my internal thoughts at the time were never, oh my gosh, I'm about to die. You know, when I jumped out of the airplane in '87, it was just sort of this matter of fact, this is when I die, but there was no fear. There was no, you know, there was no unwillingness to go do it. And I'm not a particularly, you know, courageously brave individual. It was part of, you know, doing business. It's the situation I was in. I'm not sure exactly why that is. As a matter of fact, acceptance of the environment I was in, a matter of fact, acceptance of the risk, and then thinking about how to operate in that risk. But again, I think, as we talked about with the families, you can't just minimize that with the family, because the uncertainty at home is going to cause that little veneer of stress that, you know, mama or the partner, papa is always like, well, when you go, the chances of you coming back are small. When I was commanding Nimitz, the number of parents that personally and individually came up to me as the captain, whether it was in person at a homecoming or on a phone recording or an email commentary to me, thank you for bringing my son or daughter home, my father, you know, home, was staggering. There was an assumption they were going to die when they went on deployment. There was an assumption they weren't coming home. And that's a poor assumption, but you can't let that uncertainty or that unknown fester, because it creates that stress.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, what amazing jobs. As people read your book or listen to it, you've had some fabulous jobs. And what came across, and I did love the humility of this, you know, sometimes people look at leaders like you and they go, there's no way I can be like him. He's just had this meteoric career and, you know, guy's perfect. But actually you brought out your humanity and, you know, your hope for promotion, didn't get it at that time or that job. But actually how things worked out in the end. But if you look back at your career, if you picked out one dark moment in your life, what did you learn from it, Mike?
Yeah, it's a good one, and I'm glad you talked about, you know, when anybody looks at my biography and they start listing the accomplishments I had, you know, they go, well, can't do that. Look at that, and oh, are you kidding? The path to get there was all work, and those were just all the results. So when we see somebody who's achieved, you need to think about, well, what did it take to get there, and you evaluate the person by, you know, thinking about what it took to get there. So it's interesting, and I'll tell your audience, if you familiar with the book, you'd think, well, the dark moment was, you know, ejecting out of an airplane in 1987 and having to recover from that. I can tell you that I was professionally trying to recover from that, because I had done the ultimate failure, which was to eject out of a, you know, wasn't flying very well, but a perfectly good airplane. That wasn't it. My dark moment, and the thing that took me a while to recover from, was when I didn't select for the aircraft carrier until the very, very last time. And, you know, up until that point in 2005, my career had been pretty good. And even though there were some failures along the way, I could still see that I was, you know, headed towards the direction I wanted to go. And then I didn't select. And if you replay the story in the book, your readers will understand, the readers of the book understand, I did not want to go nuclear power. One, because it was really hard. And two, because if I went to, you know, the chance was only 2 and 3. There's a 1 in 3 chance I would not got selected for a carrier. And so we reached that point at which I think I'm done. And now all that stuff I worried about 10 years prior was coming true. Well, it wasn't 10 at that point. It was 2005, 6. So I had started nuclear power in 1999. So half of a decade. And boy, was I angry. I was so angry. Viscerally and emotionally, really, really angry. And I was yelling at the Navy. I was yelling at, everything. And so for a year, I spent, alternately yelling at myself and then yelling at life and yelling at the Navy and saying that was bad. Now, what I learned through that, and I teach people, I did pay this forward. I talk about this in the book. What I learned about it is I then started to realize what might be the case in my life if I didn't select for a carrier on what turned out to be the very last look. So I wasn't the last look. There was one more look. And as usual in my life, with a hand of providence and fate, it turned out perfectly, and I got USS Nimitz. But at the time, I couldn't see that. But what I started talking to Kelly about is, well, okay, we know what it looks like when I get an aircraft carrier. That path is clear. But what's it look like when I don't? And I became very comfortable with what I call the fork in the road. So both forks, this fork over here with a carrier, that one I can see from now until the end. It's a carrier, selection to admiral, like, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 stars, and there you go. Now this one over here, I didn't want to think about. So the lesson that I teach in the book is to people who are at a fork in the road and are not knowing which way it's going to go and which way life is going to take them, be familiar with both forks. Learn about the fork that you don't want to happen. That, this one over here, that's what I want to do. This one over here. And so I got comfortable with, okay, not going to select. I'm good. We'll go do some fun job in the Navy. We'll get out. We'll figure it out. And that was after the emotion of getting angry. And then, of course, as we led up towards the next selection, and I did succeed, I was hoping I would get the carrier. It wasn't like, okay, I don't care anymore. Yeah, I did care. But what I would teach my officers, and people wouldn't select for something important to them, whether it was a rank or a command selection, I would bring them in the office and go, let me tell you a story about Nimitz. And I would tell them how emotionally invested I was in that selection for a carrier. And now here's what I learned. And then it came out great. And so, one of the themes in that book is failure and then recovery from failure, the resilience from the failure. And in all of the points at which I thought I was done in the book, and there are several, but the darkest one was when I wasn't going to be an aircraft carrier CO, I thought, because the Navy had gone another direction. That really became, an epiphany for me, that in that darkest moment, I started to get comfortable with the way that it could turn out. And then in the aftermath, when I selected Nimitz, it was really a clarion call to go, that's why you didn't select last year, because you weren't supposed to select last year. Because God says you're not going to select last year. You're going to select this year, so you get Nimitz and the rest of that thing that worked out. And so I tell people it's going to turn out better than you thought, even when the darkest moment happens. And so think more broadly and continue to ask your question. If failure hurts badly, your recovery is going to be in question. But if you put a wrapper around, but you know what? It's going to turn out all right. And I'm going to still be the same person I am. I'm going to continue to strive, and it's going to turn out all right. And whatever happens, it's going to be okay. So you got to kind of convince yourself of that. And the first theme is this failure. The second theme is the recovery from that failure. And then the initial theme is I had a North Star. I kept going towards the thing that I wanted to do. Initially, it's flight training, and then it was flying fighters, and then it was, hey, this command of a squadron would be pretty cool, and then, hey, this nuclear power thing. And even though I didn't want to go in, I hope that works, and it turned out. So I always had a North Star I was going after that's down there. And so I encourage people to always have a North Star they're going after. But when you get to that fork in the road, be comfortable with each way it could go. And if you run into a problem, you get up and recover. And failure is only when you quit. Failure is when you stop trying. Failure is not when you get, temporarily stopped. Get up again and keep going.
Yeah, that so resonates with me, and even in my short 20 years in the military. After staff college, I wanted to get promotion to lieutenant colonel and command my battalion, and I didn't get it on the first time, or the second time, or the third time. And I thought, but I came out the top 10%. What happened? It's only years later when, well, not years later, a couple of years later when I left, I made the choice to leave and do my MBA and go into business. So that door closed. I mean, I could have kept trying, but I decided, you know, smell the roses. You know, you're not in that first team. That I wouldn't be doing this kind of work now had that not happened. And so that became the new path, and I quickly realized I had to. But it's funny, even now, I still keep having a dream that I should be actually going for that promotion. But for some reason, I'm now in a civilian job. But can I go back into the army and join again and get that promotion? That's a dream. I don't know. But it is interesting that sense of not achieving something that you put your mind to and it hasn't worked out as you thought it would. What turns out, someone about 5 years previously had made some comment, a senior rank, some man I'd never met. But when I had the access to all your information laws that came in, I got to see someone had written something on me, and he questioned my judgment. Well, that's death in the military. If they ever question your judgment, and perhaps I wasn't that good at that time when I was an instructor at Sandhurst at the military academy, whatever it was, but that put a nail in the coffin. And so it was always promotion in his turn, which was not the same as promote immediately, promote early. And so you have to accept that sometimes things don't work out as you thought, but there's another plan for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got to make sure that you make the most of that new plan. You know, as John Lennon said, life's what happens when you're making other plans.
Yeah,
and
right.
I was making other plans. Now we're just towards the end, Mike, and I just want to hear from you about your ability to turn around a toxic team when you had a team that wasn't quite right. If you were to give a bit of advice to people, what would it be for a toxic individual or a toxic team?
I think that recognition, sorry about that. I think that recognition that the toxicity of the team, well, we got to find the cause of the toxicity. There might have been a toxic leader that was there before. The environment is quote unquote toxic. And so as you take over a team like that, it goes back to what you and I were talking about a little while ago about parachuting in. And I have found that when you value people and their point of view, when you come in and ask questions, you're going to succeed in dissipating the toxic environment. When you have a toxic individual, if you work hard as the leader to understand the underlying causes of the toxicity in that individual, that you can either take away the sources of uncertainty and fear that are causing the toxic behavior and responses. The person might feel threatened, or there might something feel going on. Then you take away that sense of fear, and the fact that you care about them turns around the relationship with that person. Or you figure out that the person actually just is a toxic individual, is not going to change, and then you very clearly, objectively, and with great care, you remove them from the team. If the toxic environment of a team is caused by a toxic individual, and you don't take measures as modeling as a leader the type of behavior that you expect, everybody hears it, and every one of them is thinking about, yeah, but old Jim over here, he's not acting like that. And if you allow Jim to stay and not address the things there, then very rapidly the hope the team has generated because you showed up is going to dissipate, and the team will remain toxic, or the environment will remain toxic. And so you must take care of the toxic individuals in the team. You can't come in and just say, oh, I know what's going on here. I'm all of that as a leader. We're just going to act this, and this. You'll have a little bit of a honeymoon period when you show up as a new leader, but it will go away very quickly. and you won't achieve the performance. I see that in a lot of organizations. And we'll just bring in this really awesome leader, this person who is all of that. And if that person actually is not a person of influence and is not addressing the underlying resources, you will not fix that team. Last point, you will never, ever, ever go wrong if you demonstrate trust and valuing people for their presence, their work, their perspective, and their contributions. Never. Every human being on the face of the earth wants to be valued. I've seen it everywhere in any organization. When you come in as a CEO or an admiral or a boss or a president, you come in with that position and you wear it with humility and you take the time to reach out to somebody, you get a double effect. The first one is, as a human being, you took the time to reach out. Second effect is, that's the boss. He didn't have to take time to reach out to me. You're going to get a magnification effect when you do that. And so that's really how I found the ability to address any team, whether it's actually toxic or whether it's not quite performing well or whether it's a high performing team. If somebody drops in a high performing team, oh, well, look at this, this is easy. I can only screw this up. But in a low performing team or a toxic team, now you have the opportunity to go up. And the way you do that is you go and you just love everybody. You connect with them from your heart instead of your title. And that's how you get performance out of them.
No, that's great. Thank you, Mike. Penultimate question, your favorite book and why? And then we'll do your top tip.
My favorite book is actually The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. Covey. And I have a whole reading list that I tell people about, and I continue to read, more and more and trying to, expand the way that I view leadership and being a person of value. But The Speed of Trust was handed to me when Covey came aboard Nimitz to look at our organization. It was that program that did that. And the man who was the facilitator, a big weightlifting, fired up guy named Hoke Rose, shoved this book in my hand and said, "Captain, here's this book." And I said, "Well, of course, you're going to hand me the book, whatever." I opened that book and I said, "That's it right there. That's how I want to lead." I felt that I was leading with trust, and I tend to trust more. I don't make people prove to me they can be trusted. I trust and I work on the limits of trust. That's how I lead. I thought that Speed of Trust was how I led. So it's the one that made the most impact. But How to Win Friends and Influence People by Carnegie, Speed of Trust, anything that deals with how to be a better person is usually of resonance with me.
No, I love that one. And in it is that lovely equation, trust equals speed times cost. So when trust is low, things take so long. They take so long and everything costs a lot, including the lawyers that you need to be involved because they sue and you got to have a severance pay and all sorts of things. But when trust is high, quick chat, yep, done, leave that with me, done. And it happens very quickly and there's no cost to it.
Yeah.
Because you've just have it going. So finally, Mike, would you introduce yourself, what you did before, what you're doing now, and tell us your 2-minute top leadership tip?
Well, this is great. Thanks. My name is Mike Manazir. I'm a retired US Navy Rear Admiral at 2-star. I spent 36 years in the United States Navy. I was brought up as a naval aviator. I flew F-14s for a long time, 16 years of my career. And then following selection to the US Navy nuclear power program, I went in a nuclear power program, ultimately commanding the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier. And my last operational job was I was a strike group commander for the Dwight D. Eisenhower strike group. I have 5 tours in the Pentagon, and I retired in 2017 and moved over to one of the Fortune 100 defense companies. I've had a wonderful time leading in the Navy. My book, Learn How to Lead to Win, traces my journey through the Navy, 33 powerful stories that taught me something about leadership. And then I found that in transition to a large aerospace and defense corporation, the lessons translate pretty clearly. My 2-minute top tip is learn to lead without your title. Lead from your heart. Lead through connection. And if you get squishy about it, it's talking about leading with love. You want to love the people that work for you, but your attitude is, you work for them. And when you lead from a position of influence, from your heart, from valuing people and getting to know them, you don't lead with just the title that results in you leading with authority rather than leading from that human connection. And I found that you get the best results when you can connect with your co-workers or the people you lead on a human level. The nirvana is you get to the point where you don't want to disappoint them and they don't want to disappoint you. They will fail for you, they will try, and they know you have your back. We talk about psychologically safe environments. And I think the most effective leaders create that psychologically safe environment for speaking up when there's bad news, for attempting to fail, knowing that the boss is going to back them up for failing. And you set those boundaries, and learning from the failure. So always saying, what did we learn from that failure, and moving forward. So that would be, my top tip is the ability to lead as a person, and to think of yourself as one of the team rather than the boss.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor, a real pleasure, a special connection for me with a naval aviator. And thank you for all the wisdom you've shared and for the great book that you've written.
Thanks, John. It was a pleasure to be on with you today.